This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from across the entire continent and a little bit beyond it too. Let's start with a quick run through the markets here for you. So there's a lot more company results coming through, especially on the JSE. The Clicks Group in South Africa reporting some very strong numbers today. A 16.8% rise in full year earnings for that particular retail group. Weak consumer spending and virtually non-existent GDP growth in the macro picture notwithstanding. Its shares are up by over 10% this month alone. We'll be talking about Safaricom in Kenya in just a moment. There's a new CEO at the helm. Here's what's coming up tonight. Russia announces a range of deals out of the Russia-Africa summit. Botswana waits results in cliffhanger elections. And the United Kingdom's Prime Minister is asking to hold elections on the 12th of December. We'll get around to all of that in just a moment. But let's start in Russia, where the country's President Vladimir Putin has hosted dozens of African heads of state for the last 48 hours in a summit aimed at rebuilding Russia's influence, but also its trade and investment ties across the continent. CGTN's Alexandria Majala has this report.
These two Tupolev strategic bombers arrived in South Africa on a training mission on Wednesday, coinciding with Russian President Vladimir Putin hosting dozens of African heads of state for a flagship summit. Speaking in the southern Russian resort of Sochi, Putin said he's keen on scaling up trade with Africa and has written off up to $20 billion of African debt.
Russia is one of the top 10 largest suppliers of food to the African market. We export more agricultural products to the markets of third world countries than weapons. Weapons amount to around $15 billion US, while I think agricultural supplies make up about $25 billion US. So, we have good growth potential. There is something to talk about.
Before the event, he accused Western governments of intimidating African nations while exploiting their resources. He said Russia is ready to offer help without political or other considerations. Among the meetings in Sochi, Putin sat down with Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari and more than a dozen senior officials in what turned out to be a male-only affair.
Hardly any lady here, ladies and gentlemen.
Russian media says a deal has been signed to supply Nigeria with 12 Russian-made attack helicopters. Putin also congratulated Ethiopian President Abiy Ahmed on his recent Nobel Peace Prize win. Russia's state nuclear company Rosatom is reportedly in talks with Ethiopia to build a nuclear power station there. But Putin is starting from a low base. The European Union, China, India, the United States, and the United Arab Emirates are Africa's top trading partners. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
All right, then, so let's dig a little deeper into the details of what exactly came out of the Russia-Africa summit. Niha Punia has been covering it from Sochi. She joins us now live from that very city on the shores of the Black Sea. So we've seen some deals around commodities being announced. Lukoil, for instance, announced plans to run oil and gas exploration in Equatorial Guinea. We've also seen announcements focusing on Nigeria. Walk us through the broad outlines of the deals announced at the summit.
Over the last 48 hours, every time President Putin or one of the other leaders from Africa have spoken, the phrase we've heard the most has been the potential of ties between Russia and Africa. In that light, a lot of exploratory conversations took place, but perhaps the biggest takeaway has been the signing of a $5 billion worth of trade fund between Russia and Africa. You've got the Russian side of the organizers saying that this is aimed at trying to boost access to African markets for Russian firms and vice versa, and this will help create a trade corridor, making it easier to get funding for exploring these markets. Of course, you've got a trade deal signed with Congo as well. This is to do with military and a lot of other conversations that have taken place but haven't necessarily mounted into signing of any deals yet, but important nonetheless. You've got a $300 million deal that Egypt and Russia are talking about in the agricultural sector, something similar along the lines being discussed with South Africa as well. You've got talk of a railway construction taking place with Russia's aid in Congo, and of course arms. Russia playing to its strength. 1 out of 7 exports from Russia to Africa has been arms, and it's clearly trying to remind African nations that it's a reliable partner on that front, which is why it's talking of supplying military hardware to Uganda as well as Mozambique.
Indeed. So the summit, though, generally speaking, did end with no continental trade plan being put forward, even proposals perhaps to cut tariffs in order to enhance access to the domestic Russian market. Do organizers see that as a significant missed opportunity?
That's a very valid question, one that many have been asking here in Sochi over the last 48 hours. This entire summit has been very high on optics, understandably so. It's the first time that Russia is holding an engagement along these lines. We see similar annual summits almost being held by China, India. The UK is speaking of an investor summit earlier next year as well. But Russia clearly going all out to try and woo these countries. But what have they walked away with? That's the real big question. Not much as far as deals mounting on paper are concerned, but many African leaders I spoke to, including South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, said it's not about handouts. He said this is not a kind of engagement where they're looking at immediate deliverables. It's about the right momentum. It's about the right kind of conversation, and clearly Russia is willing to engage with them on their terms, and that is a huge win, they say, for the African continent.
Indeed. Let's see how this plays out in the long run. Nihapunya in Sochi. Thank you. Now, Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has met Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali on the sidelines of that very event, the Russia-Africa Summit. The two met as tensions continue to simmer between their respective governments over a 6-gigawatt dam which Ethiopia is building on one of the tributaries of the Nile. Russia's president has offered to mediate in this dispute between Egypt and Ethiopia. The offer comes just 2 days after the United States made a similar offer to essentially host a meeting of the foreign ministers of the 3 countries involved, Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia, to discuss this row and arrive at a settlement. Just last week, Ethiopia reaffirmed its position. It says it will not accept any mediation offer other than the tripartite consultations that have been in progress. So then let's expand this conversation in a bit more detail. Adel El-Marouki is in Cairo. Gurum Chala joins us as well from Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian capital. Adel, let me start with you. So Egypt had asked the US to step in as a third-party mediator in this dispute after describing the talks with Ethiopia as being deadlocked. But how did this meeting in Sochi happen?
Well, it has been actually announced by the Egyptian president earlier this month, and that he said that he is planning to meet or scheduled to meet Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed later this month. And it was clear that it will be on the sidelines, as you've said, at the Russia-African Summit in Sochi. So the meeting comes exactly a few days after tension has escalated, after the Ethiopian Prime Minister mentions the defense line or summoning millions to go to war if needed when it comes to the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam construction. And in that regard, it seems that the meeting that took place today, according to all the statements coming out from the presidency, the foreign ministry, it seems that the two leaders have managed to diffuse this tension. According to the resources here, they say that the prime minister has stressed that his remarks were taken out of context, and that has more or less paved the road for the announcement that both leaders say that they will resume the talks for the dam very soon, as soon as possible, actually, to make sure that the process of dialogue resumes again after a few weeks ago, Cairo says it reached a deadlock.
Right. Girum, coming to you, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, says he's confident that a deal can be arrived at over how to share the waters of the Nile. But specifically, what solution does he have in mind? Is an 8-year timetable to build up water levels in the dam reservoir, is that acceptable to his government?
So, Rama, the meeting between President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed in Sochi in Russia more or less has been something that has brought back the idea of using the roundtable discussion as a solution for this deadlock that the two countries, even the three countries, had over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Now, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has spoken to local journalists after that important meeting in Russia, and he said, well, there are three ways of handling this matter at the moment, and that has been the agreement between him and the President of Egypt. Number one, he says the political discussion should continue at the level of the politicians, the presidents and the foreign ministers. And the second one, the discussion among the experts. The expert parties came from the three countries, Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia. And they are dealing with technical matters of how to fill the dam. How are we supposed to handle the environmental effects? How are we supposed to also give the ample amount of time for the dam to be filled without causing any harm to the riparian countries, lower or higher, doesn't matter. The third one, he said, however, is the construction of the Grand Renaissance Dam will also continue. So he believes that these kinds of issues will be solved because there is an agreement now in Sochi. There is no problem of discussion between him and the Egyptian parties, and Sudan also included. So he's confident because of the words that he's got from the Egyptian counterpart. And when it comes to the 8 years that you have talked about, Ramah, he has answered it by saying that the technical committee should advise what it should be done, and we can always discuss how we can go about that. So we hope that that's going to be the case soon.
Right, Adele, the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty, the one of 1929 specifically, always comes up as a point of disagreement between countries upstream, like Ethiopia, or the countries around Lake Victoria, and Egypt. But is there a wider plan? Let's keep this dispute with Ethiopia aside for the moment. Is there any plan by Cairo to try and negotiate a replacement treaty with the upstream states so that conflicts like these can be avoided in future?
Ramah, when it comes to the volume of water that is or has been eventually specified by this treaty in 1929, as you've mentioned, agreement which has guaranteed Egypt's water volume, and then another following one later, about 3 or 4 decades later, that has specified it to 55 billion cubic meters. So when it comes to that volume, Egypt doesn't seem to be flexible. The country is already at a scarce state of water resources. According to the United Nations standards, it's under the poverty line. The usual poverty line is about 1,000 cubic meters a year per capita. Egypt's share is only 600, so nearly half that volume. So if it's about water volume, Egypt will not be quite flexible because it has already shortage and it's suffering in that regard. But in terms of being flexible in building dams and supporting development, or at least loosening the veto right that this Anglo agreement gave it for the construction of projects on the Nile, I think Egypt has been actually quite supportive in recent years. We've seen several statements from the Egyptian government to support Ethiopia's development. Egypt is actually constructing a dam for Tanzania on the river, and therefore these are all indications that the country has realized that the source of strength, that to have a veto power or to show muscle, is not the way through. And so far it has been quite successful. But when it comes to the Ethiopia dam, Egypt is not concerned about specific mathematics, exact volume of water in a certain period of time. Egypt is worried about what would happen if there is drought, or if the drought season extends. So it wants Ethiopia to be quite flexible when such circumstances are. And it seems that these will be part of the negotiations and the talk rounds that will start soon.
Indeed. One last question for you, Girum. Can you get us up to speed with the latest construction status for the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam?
Ramah, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is under construction at the moment, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without no interruption. Just for your information, generally there are companies from Italy, from China, local companies at the same time, nationalities apart from Ethiopians from more than 50 to 60 countries across the world are also part of this construction of what is going to become one of the world's largest hydroelectric power generating dams. Remember, Ethiopia has a plan of concluding this dam by 2022. By 2020, however, it needs to start at least half of their power generation. So having all of these things in mind, the construction is being expedited, as the Prime Minister was saying earlier. I was also mentioning it, that the work will not be interrupted. It will continue because it will serve Ethiopia to free people from the bonds of poverty and also provide power for the region at the same time. So construction is going well. That's what we've been hearing earlier. I was talking to also some of the managers of the construction sites. The work is going well. Only the talks are lagging behind, and now we have seen light at the end of the tunnel, Ramah.
Indeed, of course, Ethiopia does have some fairly strong ambitions to become a power exporter in East Africa. Gurum Chale in Addis Ababa and, of course, Adel El Maruki in Cairo talking to us there. Now, here in Kenya, Safaricom's board has finally decided who will succeed Bob Collymore as CEO. It has decided to appoint Peter Ndegwa as the company's next CEO, effective April 1st, 2020. Ndegwa joins a Kenyan telecoms behemoth from Diageo, where he is the managing director of Diageo Continental Europe. He spent over 25 years in a whole range of roles within the financial services and fast-moving consumer goods sector in Africa and in Europe as well. In his current role, he actually oversees multiple countries, operations of Diageo in 50 states in Western and Eastern Europe, in Russia, the Middle East, and North Africa too. He previously served for 7 years as CEO in Guinness Nigeria and Guinness Ghana breweries. Kenya has moved 5 places higher in the World Bank's latest Ease of Doing Business rankings. East Africa's largest economy is now placed 4th in Africa after Mauritius, Rwanda and Morocco. The World Bank is attributing the ratings to ease of acquiring construction and property permits and ease of credit access. In West Africa, regulatory reforms in Togo and Nigeria pushed the countries to the most improved status on the lenders' report. Togo rocketed 40 places up to 97th. South Africa, of course, the continent's most industrialized nation, fell 2 spots to 84th, dealing a bit of a blow to President Cyril Ramaphosa's reform agenda. All right, then a quick run through some company headlines. Let's start in Kenya for this segment. The Kenya Electricity Generating Company, or Kenyan as it's more commonly known here, has clinched a near $60 million deal to drill 12 geothermal wells in Ethiopia. The contract with Ethiopia's independent power producer Tulumoye Geothermal Operations will include installing a water supply system. In the deal, Kenyan will supply drilling materials and also provide operation and maintenance services for the wells. South Africa's Clicks Group has reported a 16.8% rise in full-year earnings. These results are being driven by fairly strong growth in its retail and distribution businesses. Elevated households' debt, higher fuel and electricity costs have squeezed consumer income quite hard in the country, but competitive pricing and promotions helped Clicks withstand the fairly sluggish consumer spending. In the automotive world, Carlos Ghosn's lawyers have asked the Tokyo District Court to dismiss all charges against the former Nissan chairman. The lawyers say that the prosecutors colluded with government officials and Nissan executives in order to oust him. Ghosn's legal team say they have submitted 2 court filings that show that Ghosn is innocent of financial wrongdoing. And finally, Tesla, you know them, the electric car makers, they've surprised investors with a quarterly profit that sent shares soaring. This comes as the CEO, Elon Musk, promised a 2020 rollout of a cheaper SUV, he is referring to the Model Y there, and more self-driving tech. The strategy is designed to stay ahead of much larger rivals like VW, for instance, rushing into the premium electric vehicle market. Shares were up nearly 21% to just about $30 for the first time since March the 1st. That's a run through your headlines. It's time for a short break. You're watching Global Business Africa. This is coming up next. Citizens in Botswana are awaiting results of a cliffhanger election. And Sudan and Ethiopia plan a joint cross-border oil pipeline. We'll have the details next.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
For lucrative economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves
with a dedicated and diverse team of anchors. CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Tesla shares are up nearly $300 at this point in time, up 16%. But let's move on to Botswana. A lot of solar power there. But the country's also been holding elections this week. Vote counting is underway for the country's 12th general election. The main opposition party, that's the Umbrella for Democratic Change, has raised concerns about irregularities. It says that Botswana's elections are under threat, but the Independent Electoral Commission remains confident that they will deliver a credible election result. The IEC's Chief Communications Officer says they haven't received any official appeals so far, but the results are expected as early as Thursday evening. According to the IEC, the winner is declared once a party attains 29 parliamentary seats. That is the minimum requirement to form a government.
Clearly, we have got to make adjustments, and part of those adjustments would involve improving the value chain of all our natural products, whether they be natural products that are found in as part of our flora and fauna, or our diamonds and mineral wealth we generate. It's improving the value chain, and human capital goes with that, including the value chain of the human capital. That's why we want to migrate to high income status, and one of the ways in which we have decided it would be best to attempt to do is to move towards a knowledge-based economy.
All right, and that, of course, is the country's, the incumbent president, Masisi, speaking over there. So, Lindy Mtungana, my colleague, has been covering this election. She joins us now live from the capital of the diamond-producing nation. Lindy, what are the economic issues, really, at the heart of this election?
Well, Ramah, as we all know, Botswana is famously referred to as the poster child for stability and sustained economic growth in Africa. But on the ground, that rosy picture doesn't fully resonate with all the people in this country. Over the past few days, we've been getting the opinions of regular citizens, many pointing to two particular issues when it comes to the economy. There are concerns around inequality in Botswana, with some saying that this resource-rich country, those vast mineral reserves, when it comes to diamonds, it doesn't really trickle down to the people of the country. The other major concern is unemployment. The unemployment rate sits at just under 18% in Botswana, mainly affecting youth, those between the ages of 18 to 29, finding it very difficult to find employment in this country. Botswana does provide free secondary, right up to secondary school, free education, and even gives scholarships to students that study in the country, whether that be at a technikon, a college, or even at the University of Botswana. But even so, many graduate and then struggle to find jobs. This has been attributed to slowing growth in Botswana. In its heyday, in its economic heyday, the economy was growing at roughly 9% year on year. This is mainly in the early 2000s. But today, as far as the World Bank at least is concerned, Botswana might see growth in the region of about 4% for 2019.
Indeed, that's a really, really slow number given the size of the economy. But what's the plan here by either candidate to essentially try and diversify the economy? All right, unfortunately, we seem to have lost that particular connection there with Lindy Mtungana in Gaborone in Botswana. Now, Sudan and Ethiopia have agreed to construct a joint cross-border oil pipeline that will serve the two countries. The agreement was reached earlier this month during a bilateral meeting between the two neighbours. However, as CGTN's Coletta Njohi now reports, the deal needs the cooperation of South Sudan in order to happen.
Sudan has two main oil export pipelines that travel north across the country to its port. The crude oil originates in neighboring South Sudan, which pumps it into Sudan. Now, Ethiopia and Sudan have agreed to build a joint pipeline, but they will need the cooperation of South Sudan to make this happen. And stability in Juba will be key in making this initiative a success, as political analyst Sunday Okello explains.
Sudan, Ethiopia, and bringing in South Sudan, and the area, the geography where this pipeline is actually passing through, these are areas which are very contentious, very is having a lot of conflicts. People are fighting in those areas, and basically also very much underdeveloped in South Sudan especially. So we are seeing a situation where we should not just address the deal of the pipeline, but we should also look at how does it bring stability, how do you put in security issues, which is very contentious in South Sudan today.
But an older deal between Ethiopia and South Sudan is yet to materialize. In 2017, the two agreed to build a road linking the countries together, enabling South Sudan to export its oil to landlocked Ethiopia. Juba says it hasn't yet been invited by Ethiopia and Sudan for talks about the new agreement, but offers that it is open to new ideas.
We are looking for corridors of how this oil can be going out to the international markets. South Sudan is blessed. We have a lot of oil that is mainly going towards the borders of Sudan. That one will continue going if we are also going to be able to find some corridors which will bring the oil through Ethiopia to Djibouti. That will be fine. We still have our way to go through Lamu, also in Kenya. These are also the corridors that South Sudan need to, find out and work out.
Morgan adds that for now, the priority of South Sudan is to return peace to the country, which has been struggling with internal conflict since 2013. A transitional government is set to form in South Sudan on 12th November, but it is already facing a major challenge. All parties are set to agree on a start date, but opposition leader Riek Machar says he wants more time. He says the security is not enough for him and his people to feel safe to go back home. The government says a delay in elections is a delay in development.
Now again, Riek is asking for another 3 to 4 months. And I think that is not going to fly. People are tired. As a government, we are responsible for every citizen of South Sudan. We will not allow any citizen again to continue suffering. We are ready to form the government.
South Sudan's Petroleum Ministry says the country is currently producing close to 180,000 barrels of oil and has plans of increasing production by 15,000 more barrels soon. But it could be some time before Ethiopia is able to receive this oil from the newly agreed pipeline. Colette Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Once completed, Kenya's new port at Lamu will help to lead to the creation of substantial job opportunities directly and indirectly. That at least is the hope of the policymakers behind it. Sectors like agriculture, fisheries, manufacturing, logistics, transport, trade, commerce, they will have more ways to get their produce to markets. The port is also expected to attract larger cargo ships compared to those that can berth at the port of Mombasa, and also lower marine costs due to much faster turnaround times while reducing the cost of doing business. CGTN's Alexandra Majala takes up the story.
For the last 3 years, construction work has been ongoing at the Lamu port in Kenya's coast. This port is one of the country's flagship infrastructure projects for Vision 2030. The port is part of an ambitious 7-part infrastructure undertaking that includes the standard gauge railway line, a road network, an oil pipeline, an oil refinery, international airports at Lamu, Isiolo and Lokichogio, as well as resort cities in Lamu, Isiolo and Lake Turkana.
So LAPSET is actually a 2.3 trillion shilling project with about 7 major infrastructure projects. I think that has the ability to open up the northern frontier and almost give this country a whole new revenue line that we have been missing, because the last 50 years really concentrated on those 3 big cities.
As a fringe benefit, the resort cities are expected to boost their respective towns' tourism sector. The Lamu port is a component of the Lamu Port South Sudan-Ethiopia Transport Corridor, or LAPSET. LAPSET is set to open up Kenya's northern frontier as well as the neighboring states. Stakeholders are optimistic that the project will see a socio-economic transformation of the region through trade.
If you think about Ethiopia, it's hitting 100 million people. It's a huge market. All the big corporates in Kenya want a slice of the Ethiopian market. So I think if you can have this corridor that can open up that market, now you can transport goods and services. You're talking of a region, a combined region with over 200 million people.
At least 33 shipping companies have expressed interest in doing business at the port. Experts say that 1,500 direct jobs will be created when the 3 berths are completed, and many more will be employed by the container freight service companies. While some are enthusiastic about the project, others are cautious about what to expect.
We Lamu residents have always been sidelined because most of us are not educated. And you know, when you don't have an education, you don't have documents to apply for jobs. And you know, at the port, they will require qualifications. Obviously, there's menial jobs for those of us without degrees, but the biggest percentage of jobs will go to educated people.
Lamu Port will be a transshipment destination as its depth can accommodate large ships from which cargo can be loaded into smaller ones bound for smaller ports. The $23.2 billion project will eventually have 32 berths in total. The government hopes to accomplish this feat in the next 5 years. After the completion of the first 3, the government will open up opportunities for the private sector to build the remaining 29.
But one of the targets for the Lamu port is by the year 2030, it should be moving about 23 million tons of shipping. So even if you are to do a rough estimate of how much labor do you need around a ton, it tells you this is going to be a multi-billion dollar industry, but that's by 2030. So working backwards, because obviously it takes time, because sometimes to even get the big ships to come there, those ships sometimes are on long-term contracts with other ports. So those contracts must expire. You might see these things can take a couple of years before you see the high traffic.
Lamu Port is the largest deep-sea port on the East African coast, and it will come with additional infrastructure. Some of it includes a special economic zone, electric power transmission lines, water supply infrastructure, as well as fiber optics and telecommunications. While analysts say it may take some time for revenue and traffic to build at the port, all indications suggest that long-term, the project will transform both the country's and regional economy. Alexandria Majala for CGTN, Lamu, Kenya.
It's 18:32 GMT, time for a break. Boris Johnson wants a December election, but will the rest of the House agree with him? And tech-savvy millennials are flocking to Thailand's Chiang Mai city. We'll tell you why when we come back.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
No one again began holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Welcome back. Let's run through some stories making your headlines at this hour. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has hailed the first ever Russia-Africa summit as a success. He called this a new chapter in ties between Russia and economies on the continent. At the conclusion of the two-day event in Sochi, a number of memoranda of understanding were signed by both parties. Egypt and Ethiopia have agreed to resume talks on the sharing of water in Africa's longest river. The Egyptian government spokesperson says leaders of the two countries will revive the work of a technical committee on the operational terms and the filling processes of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The technical team had earlier failed to produce an agreement after years of talks. In Botswana, vote counting is underway for the country's 12th general election. The main opposition party, that's the Umbrella for Democratic Change, has raised concerns about irregularities. They say Botswana elections are under threat, but the Independent Electoral Commission is confident that they will deliver a credible election result. And finally, back to Egypt, at least 11 people have died since heavy rain started in the capital, Cairo, 2 days ago. Most of the victims, including children, were electrocuted by power cables submerged in floodwaters. The rains have caused enormous traffic jams and paralyzed learning across the greater Cairo area. That's a run through your headlines. Right, then on to the latest in Brexit. The UK Prime Minister has said he will give legislators more time to debate the Brexit deal, but only if they agree to a December 12th general election. Boris Johnson says he expects the EU to grant an extension to his 31st October deadline, even though he really doesn't want one. The Prime Minister urged the Labour Party to back an election in a vote that he plans to hold next week. Now, EU leaders are set to decide on Friday whether or not to grant the UK a 3-month Brexit extension. If it is postponed to the end of November, Johnson will try to get his deal through Parliament again. However, the French President Emmanuel Macron is concerned that a long extension could lead to a lot more indecisiveness by the UK or an inconclusive general election. So then let's get you up to speed with the latest developments in the UK. Andrew Wilson is live in London tonight. So, Andrew, Boris Johnson failed to convince the Labour Party to back a motion for a general election twice now. Why does he think this time it's different?
Well, he's going to do it more formally this time. The last time he merely taunted the Labour Party and said, do you want to have an election? This time round he's going to actually table a motion and see if he can't convince them to take their argument to the country and see who may the best party win. Now, he's got to a certain extent, it is inevitable he has to go to the country at some point. He's simply not making the progress that he needs to make in the timetable he promised, this end of October deadline he stuck to. He's also got the spectre of the European decision about the extension hanging over his head, but that'll probably come through and he'll probably be granted another 3 months on that. That's more than likely, and his spies in Brussels will probably be assuring him of that. But as you say, he's got to get the Labour Party to agree to this. Now, the Labour politicians all day long today have been on the TV shows saying, yes, we're happy to have an election. Then they've been asked before Christmas and they're going, well, we are happy to have an election. And there's a problem there with Jeremy Corbyn. He desperately wants to be Prime Minister. He desperately wants to defeat the Tories. But there are those in his party who are cautioning him, saying, look, you simply haven't got the numbers. You're not popular enough in the polls. You can't do this. There are others in his party who are saying, let's do it. We can beat them. We can do this. So both leaders are having different advice whispered in their ears. And Johnson just wants to take this out and see if he can't get that majority he needs to make it much easier for him to push through his Brexit plans in the new year.
Indeed, it does get frustrating, doesn't it? But generally speaking, Where do the parties stand? From the Conservatives to the Liberal Democrats to Labour, the SNP, where do they stand on this idea of early elections?
Well, Tuesday's vote was instructive because the bill, the separation bill that Boris Johnson put through Parliament and was approved in principle on Tuesday by a majority of 30, encouraged those in his party who wanted an election to say, look, this is the time. We now have various Labour MPs motivated to back us on a bill. We're looking strong. We're looking solid. This is the time for us to strike and go to the country. The calculation for the Tories is simply they don't want people voting for the Brexit party. I mean, they're not in Parliament at the moment, but the Brexit party will always have that threat of splitting the Tory vote. Now, if they're looking solid on Brexit, which they appeared to more than they have in the past because of this vote on Tuesday, they might risk that they're going to bring the majority of the country who want to leave alongside. Now, will they get any cooperation from the other parties? Well, no one's going to go along with the Tory voting for the Tories or supporting the Tories back into power, but the Liberal Democrats might fancy their chances. They are more riding better in the polls than they have been for quite some time, and they've got a very few MPs in Parliament at the moment, so they know they would come off quite well in elections, so they might be motivated to support it. Labour will not be happy, but there will be those who think that Jeremy Corbyn can conjure up the magic. He did quite well in 2017. Not convincingly, but he did better than expected in 2017. They're hoping there might be a bit of magic there. The independents, it's not clear. The DUP may well fall behind and say, well, yes, have an election if you want to. But the principal concern for the Tories is to get those Brexit votes on their side and not split that Leave vote in the country. And Boris Johnson's gamble is that now is the time to take that to the country.
Indeed, the last time that a Tory Prime Minister gambled in this manner, it was Theresa May, and she was trying to essentially boost a majority in Parliament. But on paper, this general election takes time and energy, both precious resources, away from the main issue at hand, sorting out the divorce terms between the UK and the EU. So what problem exactly is Boris Johnson trying to solve by going down this route?
Well, and there have been a lot of complaints already. MPs have been saying in Parliament today, look, this is a waste of time. We have the most important decision of our political careers to make on behalf of the country. We cannot be wasting time with internal politics, with one party trying to get a majority over another. This is not the time to go to the country and get them to re-choose their Prime Minister. We need to deal with this problem at hand. However, Boris Johnson's calculation is that the moment he declares an election, of course, remember, he has to withdraw his bill. All negotiating in terms of Brexit then stops 5 weeks before the election date. That will be 6th of November if the election is agreed for December the 12th. That still gives him just over a week to keep pushing the horseplay a little further and see if he can't make some progress. But yes, Boris Johnson, if an election is declared and the parties go off to campaign, he has to withdraw his separation bill and it has to go to the country. That means everything gets put on hold. And the danger for the Prime Minister is that the country, instead of responding to what he wants them to see, which is a plucky leader trying to drag a recalcitrant Parliament to heel and get them to take things seriously, that's the image he's trying to portray. The danger is the country might see him as someone who's gone on a vanity project when there's serious business to be done. And that could cost him dearly in an election.
Indeed. Let's see how it all does play out. Andrew Wilson in London, thank you very much. Just to give you a sense, dear viewer, of essentially the argument that Johnson is making, this is what he wrote to the Labour Party leader. Quote, "It is our duty to end this nightmare and provide the country the solution as soon as we reasonably can. These repeated delays have been bad for the economy, bad for business, bad for millions of people who are trying to plan their futures." I'll let you know how that plays out. Right, on to monetary policy now. The European Central Bank has kept its policy rates unchanged in what marked President Mario Draghi's, Super Mario, as some call him in the market, last monetary policy meeting as the head of the ECB. The central bank is also keeping its forward guidance essentially unchanged. It's suggesting that its main policy rates will remain at their current levels or lower. That's at least until there's much stronger evidence of a rise in prices. The ECB expects GDP growth of about 1% for the region this year, 1.2% possibly in 2020. The ECB's current mandate is to keep inflation below but close to 2%. This is as the Eurozone continues to see much lower growth rates on the back of global trade tensions, a weaker manufacturing sector, particularly in powerhouses like Germany, and other economic uncertainties like, as we've just discussed, Brexit. Salmon fishermen in Scotland are flourishing now thanks to high demand for their produce from Chinese consumers. And the business tie is extremely important as Brexit and other uncertainties loom large. Phil Lavelle has more from the Scottish Highlands.
From sea to sky to somewhere in China, Scottish salmon is taking off, both literally.
We can harvest salmon from this site on a Friday and it will be in China on a Sunday afternoon.
And metaphorically.
The demand for all farmed salmon, and in particular Scottish salmon, is far outstripping supply.
Once a delicacy, now a staple. Salmon, the UK's biggest food export. Just ask Scotland's last independently owned farm.
Salmon farming is the greatest economic success story in the Highlands. Really? It's that important, yeah. Because it's completely, private enterprise. There's no subsidy attached to it.
Because this market is worth around £1 billion a year, and it's rising.
Why? Well, it is partly to do with China, where the middle class is set to double over the next decade, which means more products like this heading that way. It is a big market.
Well, firstly, their economy is growing fast. Their populations getting wealthier and wealthier. They want to drive good cars, drink good whiskey, and eat good Scottish salmon. And so it's been fantastic for us, very good.
For British businesses, global trade has never been more important. That's especially business outside of Europe, because
we must leave the EU.
Brexit is coming, we think.
Presumably if Brexit goes ahead,
yes,
that's going to mean that the international market is way more important to you than it currently is.
We've been consciously trying to improve our export market for the last 5 or 6 years.
Right, okay.
But I would say the improvement was accelerated after the big vote, when we knew it was going to happen. It just really made us focus the mind. So 60% of our sales are the US. Asia is probably about 15 to 20% in total. And Europe, believe it or not, we're actually only selling about 10% into the EU. And that's probably a bit of a deliberate decision.
What is certain is that China now has a taste for one of Scotland's proudest exports, and they couldn't be happier or busier here. Phil Lavelle, CGTN, Ullapool in the Scottish Highlands.
In the last few decades, as data prices have come down and we're getting a lot more devices that allow us to connect from anywhere in the world, that's essentially allowed a growing number of people to abandon their offices and work as they travel around the world. This next story comes to you from Chiang Mai, a city in the north of Thailand that's often described as the digital nomad capital of the world.
Just think, 1 month in Colombia and then 2 months in Romania. Or perhaps a few months in Chiang Mai, Thailand, then back to England just in time for the brilliant blue skies of summer. That has been Chris's life on repeat for the past 3 years. He is part of the growing global community of digital nomads, a location-independent workforce for whom work and travel are no longer mutually exclusive.
I was just living in this sort of self-imposed prison, and I saw that I was spending so much each month and not leaving home, working from a computer, that I thought, well, why don't I do this from somewhere nicer?
That somewhere nicer now happens to be Chiang Mai, northern Thailand, a city with perhaps the most concentrated nomad population in the world. Tens of thousands flock to this city with a few $1,000s and dreams of making it big, or at least keeping their travel-work lifestyle going as long as possible.
This city was once an idyllic, peaceful city, but in the past decade, digital nomads have helped shape this city's economy and transformed it into an urban, modern, creative hub for digitally savvy millennials. It has all the essential ingredients that a digital nomad requires: high-quality living at a low cost, high-speed internet, and a community of other nomads to network with.
By next year, the global workforce will consist of mostly millennials, with estimates that by 2035, there may be as many as 1 billion digital nomads globally. However, as it stands, most currently operate in a legal grey area regarding their immigration status in Thailand.
Thai government, it's easier for them to get a visa to work in Thailand, maybe like for the first year or two, and after that they can decide if they want to set up, some sort of permanent settlement in Thailand.
For Chris, who sells auto parts online, a permanent setup is not in the cards.
It's quite strange towards the end of the trip. Or usually what prompts me to leave is a sense of wanting to sort of cash in the achievements and hit a reset button.
And until he feels that it is time to push the reset button, he, like all other digital nomads, will continue to live the drifting life, with the city acting as their office, with little stake in the spaces they briefly occupy. Dusita Saogao, CGTN, Chiang Mai, Thailand.
All right, then a quick run through commodities for you. So one of the deals that was agreed to is the Russia-Africa summit will see Lukoil get access, potentially get access to the continent's biggest oil producer, Nigeria. The MOU it signed with the Nigerian state-owned oil company focuses on two things: deep offshore fields development, as well as rehabilitating NNPC's mostly non-functional oil refineries. But the thing is, Nigeria did have a deal with Gazprom about a decade ago to develop its natural gas reserves, build infrastructure, and that really didn't go anywhere. So will this MOU with Lukoil be any different? We'll find out. Here's what's coming up next. We'll look at the story of a Nigerian startup that's taking delivery services to the next level.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Now, in some countries, getting everything on your grocery list delivered to your doorstep with one click may seem as something that's completely out of reach, about as out of reach as a tin of imported beluga caviar, for instance. But in Nigeria, on-demand delivery services are properly taking off. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus now with the story of Oya Now. It's the first logistics startup in Africa's most populous nation that offers a broad range of products at the click of a button.
It's midday and this Oya Now agent has arrived at this fruit market in Abuja to pick an order from one of the fruit sellers here for a client. Both agent and seller confirm the order on the phone, then the fruits are selected and put in the bag. Before long, the agent is on his way to deliver the order to the client. He soon arrives at the client's place where the delivery is made before he heads off for possibly another errand. The process essentially sums up how Oya Now operates. And the logistics startup delivers everything from groceries, food, medicine, and much more.
Especially for groceries, I think using Oya Now is much easier than having to go and pick up the groceries yourself. Just because I can just see the items on the app, select. I don't have to go to individual stalls and then do the selection myself. So it's really convenient to have that app on your phone. It saves a lot of time, it saves a lot of money as well.
Eric Obianozie and his friends launched Oya Now in 2017 to simply run errands for clients, pick and drop variety of items ordered through their platform.
We saw the lack of convenience and care that was taken by other logistics companies in this field. So we felt it was a gap we could cover. And then the lack of options when it comes to ordering things to your home. That's the convenience of having that. We saw and we thought we could improve at least the betterment of the lives of Nigerians by doing that.
Oya Now has carved a niche for itself in the logistics market by partnering with pharmacies, supermarkets, makeup brands and restaurants, so customers can also order medicine, groceries, beauty products and food from its website or app. The startup also lists home cleaning and maintenance services on its platform, all available for order till 2 a.m., an option that didn't exist before now.
Basically, you place the order on the app. One of our customer care representatives, they confirm the order, they call to make sure that it's available. They get to the pickup point. They pick it up and they deliver it to the customer. It's been good so far. We're definitely going to make it better with the new marketing pushes we're about to lead forward from towards the end of the year now.
One thing you can't help but notice across their Lagos, Abuja and Kano offices is that Oya now is a youth-centric brand run by a team of 100 young people, an unlikely scene in this part of the world. The founders themselves are below 30, and they're leading Africa's biggest economy into a future where commerce meets tech. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Now, in South Africa, public cemeteries in major cities are very rapidly hitting their design capacity. Grave diggers now have to reopen old plots each week just to accommodate second burials. But one chain of private cemeteries is now offering a luxury alternative, if you will, for those who can afford it. CGTN's Daniela Pearson explains.
Lawrence Pue buried his cousin here last month in Soweto, South Africa. Now he's back at the Nasrec Memorial Park Cemetery, this time to pick a resting place for himself.
I decided to buy a plot here because recently, 2 months back, I buried my cousin here. So I fell in love with this place. So I decided that I want to be buried here as well.
In South Africa, even cemeteries aren't exempt from crime. This is one of 5 owned by Calgro M3, which promises a well-maintained and well-protected space. Pue says he paid about $1,700 for his future plot.
They do charge a lot, but at the end of the day, it's my wish.
The death of a loved one can be a costly affair for the average South African. Households can spend up to a year's salary on a funeral, and an estimated 1/3 of the population takes out insurance for it.
If you look at more affluent people in South Africa, they typically cremate. It's the people that theoretically, a normal course, shouldn't be able to afford this. They do afford this. Because this is such, as I said, cultural and celebration of life, they would like to do the best for their loved ones that passed away.
A plot at a public cemetery will cost around $200, but prices at the Nasrec Memorial Park can reach $24,000 for an 8-person plot with all the bells and whistles.
It's not on for me now, because
I mean, when you're dead, there's no reason to be buried in a place that costs so much money. I could have been enjoying that money while I was still alive.
there's no need to endaweni.
Land and who owns it remains a sensitive and contested topic, a quarter-century after apartheid. And the divide between the country's haves and have-nots is clear, even in death. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
All right, then a quick run through the currencies here for you. So the Kenyan shilling, 103 1/4. Remember, this is a currency that's been knocking on the door of 104 for the better part of a couple of weeks now. So it's essentially been pulling back quite a bit. Two debt auctions of note. Yesterday, the government came to market looking for about $600 million to fund its infrastructure program for the 2019-2020 fiscal year. It got bids closer to the $800 million level, but essentially at the end of the day, it only took about essentially $680 million of that cash at a coupon rate of just under 12%. And that skewed the auction for today for short-term debt by quite a bit. That's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. We'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. It's been quite the roller coaster from Sochi to London to Addis and Cairo. Several ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington.